The chainsaw stopped before it even finished the cut. Mark Delaney stood back, wiping sweat from his forehead, staring at the base of the old oak tree his crew had been hired to remove. 200 years old, maybe more, its roots had cracked the foundation of the house behind it. That was supposed to be the whole job. Cut it down, grind the stump, load the truck, go home. But something metal had caught the blade. He knelt down, brushing away the dirt with his glove, and felt the edge of something buried just beneath the deepest root. Not a pipe. Not scrap. A box. Rectangular, rusted, wrapped in what looked like oilcloth that had rotted down to brittle threads over the decades. He called the homeowner over before touching it further. Claire Whitfield had only owned the house for 4 months. She'd inherited it from a great-aunt she barely remembered meeting, a quiet property at the edge of town with a yard nobody had touched in years. She wasn't expecting anything except paperwork and property taxes. She definitely wasn't expecting this. The box was heavier than it looked. When Mark finally worked it loose from the roots, dirt spilled from a corner where the metal had rusted through. And there, faded but still legible, was a label. Handwritten. A name. Claire read it twice. She didn't recognize it. Not a relative she knew of, not a family friend, not anyone from town history she'd ever heard mentioned. Just a name written with careful, deliberate strokes like whoever wrote it wanted it to survive. That night, she did what anyone would do. She searched the name online. Nothing. She checked the county clerk's public records database. Nothing. No birth certificate. No death certificate. No marriage license. No school record. No obituary. It was as if the person named on that box had never existed at all. And yet someone had buried something for them, wrapped it carefully, and placed it 200 years deep beneath a tree that had been growing ever since. Claire told herself there was a simple explanation. Old records get lost. Fires happen. Clerks make mistakes. She drove down to the county archive the next morning, expecting to spend 20 minutes proving herself wrong. Instead, she spent 3 hours finding out she was right to be uneasy. The archivist, a patient older man named Walter, pulled up the town's digitized records for the decade she was asking about. Then he frowned at his screen and pulled up something else. And something else again. There was a gap. Not a small one. 2 full years of town records, birth registries, land deeds, court filings, all of it either missing or damaged beyond recovery. Walter explained that a fire had swept through the old records annex generations ago, but what struck Claire wasn't the fire itself. It was what had burned. Only documents from those 2 specific years were affected. Everything before and after was untouched. Walter said he'd seen it before, other researchers asking about the same gap, and every time the story was the same. Something or someone had made sure that window of time left no trace. Claire drove home with more questions than she'd started with. If this person's name wasn't in any surviving record, it wasn't because they'd been forgotten. It was because someone had made sure they couldn't be found. She almost let it go. Then a text from her cousin, who dabbled in genealogy, changed everything. He'd been digitizing old newspaper microfilm for a hobby project and stumbled across a classified ad from a neighboring county, decades before Claire was even born. A want ad. Live-in caretaker position. And the name on that ad, the employer's name, was Claire's own family surname. The same name that had owned this land for 4 generations. Claire stared at the grainy scan on her phone screen, the oak tree visible through her kitchen window behind it. Whoever had buried that box hadn't been a stranger passing through. They had been connected to her family. Directly. Deliberately. And whatever had happened to them, her own relatives had been the ones who buried the truth. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that she was pulling on a thread that led somewhere she wasn't supposed to go. But she kept pulling. She brought the box's label to a document examiner, a woman named Priya who specialized in handwriting analysis for legal cases. Claire expected a shrug, maybe a guess about the era it came from. What she got instead made her sit down. Priya compared the handwriting on the label to a stack of old estate documents Claire had inherited along with the house. Papers from a relative named Edwin, a great-great-uncle Claire had only ever heard about in passing. Family stories said he died young, out of state, some kind of accident before Claire was even born. The handwriting matched. Not similar. Matched, down to the pressure strokes and letter formations experts used to confirm identity. But the timeline didn't work. The box had been buried, by tree ring dating around the root growth, at least 15 years after Edwin was supposed to have died. If Edwin wrote that label, he was alive years after his own family buried him. Claire drove out to the small cemetery where Edwin was supposedly laid to rest, a plot she'd visited as a child without ever questioning it. She requested burial records from the county, something she never imagined she'd need to do for a grave she'd stood in front of her whole life. The paperwork showed the plot had been purchased, paid in full, sealed with a headstone. But the interment logs, the actual delivery and burial records required by law at the time, showed nothing. No body was ever received at that cemetery under Edwin's name. Someone had paid for a grave that was never used. Claire stood there in the quiet cemetery, staring at a headstone that marked nothing at all, and felt something cold settle into her chest. Her family hadn't just lost track of a relative. They had built an entire fake ending for him on purpose and buried the real truth somewhere else entirely. The question wasn't where Edwin had gone. The question was why her family needed everyone to believe he was dead. Claire almost stopped there. Some part of her wanted to leave Edwin buried, in whatever way he actually was. But a strange detail kept nagging at her, something her cousin mentioned in passing during his research. A nearly identical case, 40 miles away, another old oak tree removed during a property renovation. Another rusted box found tangled in its roots. Same style of handwriting. Same missing records. A different name, but the same pattern, dated almost exactly one generation before Edwin. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a cycle. Claire spent the next weeks going through everything she could find of her family's old paperwork. Boxes she'd never bothered opening after the funeral. Buried near the bottom of an old filing cabinet, she found it. A copy of an inheritance agreement, generations old, written in dense legal language that took her 3 readings to fully understand. The clause was simple once she saw it clearly. If certain family members were ever formally declared dead, ownership of the land and everything tied to it would transfer outside the family, to a distant relative's branch that had cut ties long before Claire was born. Someone generations ago had found a way around that clause. Keep the person alive on paper. Never file the death certificate. Let them fade quietly into private life somewhere else under a name no one would ever officially connect back to the family, while a hollow grave and a burial record kept up appearances for the outside world. Edwin hadn't disappeared. He'd been protected, hidden in plain sight, so the family could keep what was legally theirs. The box under the oak tree wasn't a mystery to be solved. It was insurance, buried and reburied every generation, whenever the pattern needed to repeat. Claire sat with that thought for a long time. Then she opened the folder her aunt's lawyer had given her after the inheritance, papers she'd signed without fully reading, the way most people do. Near the back, in a clause she'd skimmed past, was a name. Her own. Written in a way that made her wonder exactly what she had just agreed to, and what her own family might quietly be planning to protect, using her the same way they once used Edwin. If stories like this pull you in the way they pulled in Claire, make sure you're subscribed. Real mysteries like this one are still out there waiting to be found.